It's 4:34, so I want to get us started. And hopefully if there's more people who are going to sign on, they'll sign on soon. Just want to kick off. This is the second meeting that we've held, town hall style meeting to allow residents to kind of get some information about the overall process. This isn't really, this isn't an opportunity to talk about your specific property, but more about the process and the criteria or the analysis that the revaluation company did. So I just want to kick it off. I'm First Selectwoman Brenda Kupchik, and I was notified that, you know, we do have a state statute in place that requires that each town do a revaluation, put it out to bid as we did with an RFP process, and then in our case, the Board of Selectmen voted to choose municipal valuations, and this is all based on state statute. We have the obligation to do this, and it was done, and so it's finished now. And so now the informal hearings mostly have taken place, and I know some people couldn't get into that process. The revaluation company did extend it by 2 weeks and to allow more people. And what I said at the meeting that I held last week was that people who couldn't get into the informal hearing process to sign up for the Board of Assessment appeal process, they at least have an opportunity. And so today we have our tax assessor, Ross Murray, on the line, and we have the owner of Municipal Evaluations, Mike Fazio. And so I am going to kick this off to Ross so he can talk a little bit about the process, and then we're going to go to Mike Fazio, who's going to talk about how what he did during the evaluations. And then I'm going to ask anyone who has questions about the process and so on and so forth to go into the chat on this WebEx and put your questions in. And so then I will read them, and then we can have some dialogue. We have a much smaller group than we had last week. We had almost 100 people last week, so it was a lot more people, and we wanted to keep it more so everyone had an opportunity, but we may be able to have a more intimate dialogue because we don't have as many people. So I'm going to kick it off to Ross Murray to talk a little bit about the process.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. Good afternoon. Caution everyone, my computer is giving me trouble and my WebEx may die, so I don't know how that'll affect the call, but I will forge ahead. So as Brenda said, we are required by state statutes to do a revaluation every 5 years. We are also required to do a site visit or update the house once every 10 years. And that's typically referred to as a full inspection or full revaluation. And that was done in 2015, so we did not have that requirement this time. We did an RFP, we had 4 respondents, and we went through the process and selected municipal valuations, as Brenda discussed a bit. And we started the process in about January of 20. The revaluation company would start to look at sales. They initially looked at sales as far back as January of 19, and they used that to initially build a pricing model. And that is how we determine the values of the home. So this is not an appraisal that you may be used to seeing if you have purchased a home or have a mortgage. It doesn't come, we don't have the 3 best comps or 5 best comps for your house. We are doing a mass appraisal. And how we do that is we analyze all the sold properties in a period of time. So as I mentioned, we started as far back as January of 19. We refined that to the 1-year period prior to October 1 of 20, which is our valuation date, to produce the final results. So we analyze all the sales, and we develop a model based on what we see in those sales. And then we test the results. And there's some statistics that we use. The most important one is the sales ratio, and second is coefficient of dispersion. Sales ratio just tells us how close is the number we're producing compared to the sales price. And the coefficient of dispersion tells us how close that distribution is to 100%, to 1. The standard on that is up to 15%. Anything below 10 is considered very good, and we were at 8%. So our model, the statistics on our model was very good. After we come up with the values for all the sold properties, we then apply that to all the unsold properties in town. And that's how most properties will get their value. So that the revaluation company would have reviewed all the sales that occurred and to ensure that they were listed accurately. And then they all, after the final values are produced, we would review those in total. We finished that review in about mid-December, and that's when we were able to produce the notices and get them out to you. We talked a bit about the informal process, which is coming to an end this Friday. They did extend that 2 weeks for us. After that, you will need to go to the Board of Assessment Appeals. We will have those applications for the Board of Assessment Appeals available at the end of the week, and then you can file that with my office. It must be received by February 19th, and that's very important. It has to be received. We can't accept postmark. Again, this is a statutory-driven process. So anybody that has an application in by February 19th will get a hearing. The board they've expanded the board this year from a normal 5 members to 9 to handle the anticipated increase in volume from a revaluation, and they are committed to let everyone have a hearing that applies in time. Mike, you want to fill in the blanks there? Anything
Sure.
I might have missed?
Thanks, Ross. My name's Mike Fazio. I'm one of the principals here at Municipal Valuation Services. I've been in the real estate appraisal business for 35 years. Our office is here in Fairfield. We've been doing municipal revaluations in the state of Connecticut for over 17 years. Our company has done the revaluations in most of the towns in Fairfield County, and probably, I think we've done the revaluations in all the big cities throughout the state of Connecticut. The process in Fairfield is typical for what they're calling statistical valuations throughout the state of Connecticut. We're required to look at sales from October 1st of 2019 to October 1st, 2020. However, when we're creating the model, we expand the sales to really get an abundance of sales in the model. And the model, the way it works is the town is split up into different land neighborhoods. And what a land neighborhood is an area where land values are relatively similar. Now, not all are going to be the same, but you wouldn't, for example, you wouldn't compare a piece of land on Fairfield Beach to one in Greenfield Hill. So a land neighborhood is an area that is very homogeneous and in close location to one another. Within the town, I believe there's about 23 land neighborhoods. We've created several more during the revaluation process. For example, Stratfield, North Stratfield and Stratfield were all grouped together. We created 2 separate neighborhoods there. And that holds true, I think, in 4 or 5 different areas of town. We created separate neighborhoods because we felt that the neighborhoods that were in place were a little large and some more refinement needed to be made. To the land value is added the improvement values. And the improvement values are calculated based on the style of the house, the characteristics of the house, and the grade of the house. The grade is kind of what the craftsmanship or workmanship of the house is. The higher the grade, the higher level of craftsmanship is in the house. The lower the grade, the more plain the house is. Once that the characteristics are put into the system. Also included would be like bathrooms, square footage, garages, fireplaces, any type of amenity you would see within the house. They're all assigned a value. These values are all then added up, added to the land value. But to the improvements then comes the condition. The condition of the property is what drives the depreciation. So if the house is built in 1940s, but it's in good condition, it doesn't mean the house is 80 years old. It means that the house has an effective age maybe of 10 to 20 years old. And that's all driven by the condition, in which then calculates the depreciation. So the depreciation is then taken off the improvement values, which gives you the total depreciated improvement values. That's added to the land value, and that's how your overall value is calculated. Currently, we are in the process of, I'll step back. Once all the values were done, as Ross said, a review was made throughout the town. The notices were printed and sent out to all the property owners throughout the town. We then opened our phone lines, and we had access through the internet to make appointments for informal hearings. They're concluding this week. To date, we had about 900 informal hearings. This is the process where you're allowed to call up, provide information if you don't agree with the value, or if you find some characteristics of your field card are incorrect. This is the time where we could change it very easily. There's no, you won't have to go through the formal process of the BAA. We could take a look at those changes prior to the grand list being signed. We're concluding that process this Friday, because at that point we need to make all the changes in the system, get the file over to the assessor's office in order for the assessor's office to be able to sign the grand list on time. After the grand list is signed, you will receive a change notice or a notice in the mail reflecting if it was changed or not changed, if you had an informal meeting. At that point, you could make an appeal to the Board of Assessment Appeals if you're not happy with the results of the informal meeting. Once you had your hearing with the Board of Assessment Appeals, if you're still not happy, the process would be to file suit in Superior Court. If there's any questions, I guess that we could answer them at this point. Brenda, do you want to ask them, or you want me just to go through the chat room? And
hold on, let me see here. Okay, so it's one question, Mike, is on the field card. Some building plans are in red and some are in blue on the white background. Is there any significance to this difference?
I think that's just on the online. If you printed the field card in the town hall, they're all black and white. There is no difference between the red and the blue.
Okay, and how many people use the informal hearing process, and what percentage of the residential properties in Fairfield use that process?
So we had about 900 parcels out of the 20,000, so that is about 4.5% of the property owners made appointments for the informal hearings.
And how many, was it 900, Mike?
900 parcels.
Okay. Okay. Okay, and one question is, how can some homes with 2 times the square footage end up assessing less than another home with much less square footage?
The question, you would have to give a specific example of something like that. If you have twice the square footage with everything else being equal, that can't happen. There must be other differences on the field card, as you might be in a different area, it's a different aged home, the grade is different, but the model only reflects the information that's put into it. and then values are assigned, and the value is then calculated with a computer model. We don't really touch every single home throughout the municipality. So it would be impossible for that to happen, all other things being equal. But if somebody had a specific example, when they have their informal meeting, they could show that that example, and we could talk about it at that point.
Okay. One question, what about the allowance for unusual sale activity due to COVID?
So the statute requires us to value properties as of October 1st, 2020. The unusual sales activity during COVID, that affects all properties throughout the entire state of Connecticut. We have to reflect what the real estate market is doing. For example, if you were to sell your property on October 1st of 2020 and you were asking $500,000 and someone made an offer for $500,000, you wouldn't say to them, well, since it's COVID, I only want $450,000. It's the market value, and what market value is what a willing buyer and a willing seller is willing to take, and we need to reflect that. That is part of the general accepted appraisal practices. That is what the state of Connecticut requires, and statistically, that is what we have to reflect in the reports we need to send to the state.
And a question, I think this question is pertaining to the informal hearings that this person's writing that on their call during the informal hearing, it was just a data collector, and we had this conversation at the last revaluation public meeting. People felt they just wanted to go over the card, the person on the phone, and make sure that the information was correct, and they didn't feel it was a productive telephone call. Mike, can you address that a little bit?
Sure. So it would be physically impossible for me, myself, to do every single phone call. So what we have is we have our team answering the phone, taking information. And the first point of information is we want to make sure that the field card is correct. Because if the information or the physical characteristics of your home are incorrect, and that information is fed into the model, the result is going to be wrong. So we always review the field card with the property owner. Once we get past that, we open up the questions or the floor to the property owner to put on some information that they want us to consider in their assessment. A lot of times the most effective way is, and a lot of people, either they send an appraisal in that they had done within the last year or so, or they'll send over comps. And even after the hearing, they email information over to us, and we'll consider that the process once the phone call is done is the team will put together all the information, and then all those properties do cross through my desk. I make the changes personally myself, whether it's going to be changed or not changed. I look at all of them, and then the change is made.
Okay. There's one question from a resident, but this is really more about an infrastructure issue in the beach area. So I'm happy to, if you would like to email me directly at firstselectwoman@fairfieldct.org to ask any of those personal questions or infrastructure questions. I'm happy to talk to you or email and set up a time to talk. The next question is, if there was no site visit, how can they possibly know about the improvements in the home? Mike?
So the revaluation that is required in this interim for the town of Fairfield is what they call statistical revaluation. And what that requirement entails is we physically inspect the sales whether we inspect them on MLS or drive by. That's in order to make sure that the model has the right information. However, all the properties that have not sold throughout town, it goes based on what the physical characteristics that are already in the CAMA system. And the CAMA system is the computer model that is hosted within the town. We're not out doing a measure and list. That is the next revaluation. The next revaluation will require that every house is inspected, exterior and interior, regraded, look for things that are missing, that type of information. Under those revaluations, also data mailers are sent to each property owner. So you might have gotten them if you have property in other towns. But that's not this cycle. This cycle is the only requirement that the town has to do is statistically adjust the prices and assessments of the homes.
And I know this may have came up during one of your presentations to the Board of Selectmen, or you also look at building permits, correct?
Right, so all the building permits.
So if you, for example, if someone pulled a permit to do a new kitchen or a bathroom, you would have that information in the work you do?
Right, so the assessor's office inspected all the building permits. We reviewed them. All that information is considered when we did the valuation. Also, a lot of times we will be driving in a neighborhood and see something because somebody calls up and says, hey, I have this or a swimming pool at my house. Can you come by and take a look to make sure it's there? Or a neighbor might say next door they put in a deck. And it's not on the card. We'll consider all that information and we make the changes if they're valid. But we're not required at this point to go by every single home.
Thank you. And then the next one is, why did you use a statistically extreme pricing environment in Fairfield, especially the beach area, when COVID drove up prices significantly? Why were the timelines to pull pricing statistics expanded to not unfairly victimize residents? Assessment increases as much as 30%. Further, why are there no reasonable ceilings and assessment increases, especially in a challenging economic environment? Do you expect, this would be me, I expect a decrease in the mill rate to mitigate these extreme cases? I'll just answer that, and then Mike, I'll let you talk about your process. But the grand list has grown, will be growing due to this, even commercial, and that gives the possibility of the town being able to look at reducing the mill rate. But we're just doing the budget process now. I was in budget meetings all day long with all the departments, and we'll continue those in the next couple of weeks, and then have to put together my budget. There's so many pieces and things that we look at. So that is something we are going to be looking at during the process, the budget process. And I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
So by state statute, we have a specific time frame that we need to report in our statistics, and it's October to October. And whatever the real estate market is doing during that period of time, we need to reflect. We can't say that, oh, the COVID virus is there, therefore we're omitting sales that have increased or decreased. It's just not the way it works. We have to reflect the market, and the market drives the values.
Okay.
And just as some areas went up, some areas didn't go up as much. This is the reason why you do revaluation. It's to create every 5 years a level playing field once again, to adjust neighborhoods or areas that have changed.
The other question is, what card are we supposed to be looking at? I would imagine the card that you mailed or the one on vision appraisals. Can you talk about that, Mike? Or Ross?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Okay.
The card is, we call it a field card, and it's the card, it's that lists all the information that we have on your home, the characteristics. And that is available at vgsi.com, and you can navigate to the taxpayer info and then to Connecticut and Fairfield. There's also a more direct link off our website. And that is the first thing you should do when you're reviewing your assessment is look at your card and make sure that we have everything listed correctly.
Okay, the next one is, what is the classification requirements for a bedroom?
So bedrooms typically have closets, and that's how they're outlined in the field card characteristics. But if you have 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms or 5 bedrooms, it really doesn't change the value of your house, because the value is adjusted in the square footage, and it would be double counting it. So the way the model works is, if there's a square footage of the house, there's an expectation of how many bedrooms that house should have. Now, if you had an 8,000 square foot house and it only had 2 bedrooms, at that point there would be some kind of functional obsolescence to the home, and we would make an adjustment there. But if you have a 2,000 to 3,000 square foot home, you would expect to have 3 or 4 bedrooms. Sometimes if you have over 3,500 or 4,000 or 5,000 square foot homes, you see 4 or 5 bedrooms. So it's really, the adjustment is made in the square footage, and having, most of the time, the way they delineate bedrooms is including a closet within the room.
So just to follow up on that, maybe for
we
people,
also look for, yep. We also look for that the bedroom would have privacy, you know, a door, and not provide access to other rooms in the house. And we really treat these on a case-by-case basis. We really want to look at that space before we make a determination.
So just for everyone's knowledge, Ross and Mike, if you have a room that has a door that's private, but say, for example, doesn't have a closet, is that still a bedroom?
It could be.
Okay, but the bottom line is the square footage of the house. Is that correct?
Well, the bedrooms are included in the square footage of the home. It's only when there's a relationship of bedrooms to square footage that don't make sense where an adjustment would be made in the CAMA system. So if you had 2 bedrooms in a very large house, or if you had a very small house that had 6 bedrooms, obviously there must be a mistake. So we would look at that and kind of try to make an adjustment there to find out how many bedrooms there really are. And a lot of times people call up and say, I only have 4 bedrooms, not 5 bedrooms, and we'll have a conversation about it, and we'll make an adjustment at that point based on the conversation on the phone. I also included the link on the chat room for your field card if you're interested.
Oh, that's good, because I think another way. Okay, the next question is, do town hall field cards have any different, more or less information than can be seen online?
They do. There is a bit more detail on them, and I have looked into putting that card on Vision's site. That will probably happen after the grand list is completed at the end of the month. The problem is that those cards are static. They're not updated as we make changes. And for the realtors and appraisers and title searchers that are looking for up-to-date information, it could be stale. And that way we'll know at what point in time the card was created.
Okay, and then there's another bedroom question, but I believe Mike Fazio answered that. Why specific, or that's, if they aren't doing a site visit, we answered this earlier, how do they come up with improvements? The building permits, obviously, and every 5 years is a more thorough revaluation, and this one is just an outside, and also looking at building permits and any sort of improvements that are listed with the town. See, was a COVID question point, the activity of homes was high and prices were high. I've seen appraisals for financing that living areas typically adjusted to normal one comp to another. I've seen that done 50 to 75 per square foot. What is the cost used in the model, and would that differ from the cost shown in the field card?
So mass appraisal is different than doing an appraisal on a form as with comps that they're typically used to seeing for real estate appraisals. We do both of them here. We have an appraisal firm that does a lot of financing appraisals. But with mass appraisal, you're not adjusting one sale to another. You're feeding all the sales into a computer model, which then extracts different values for each characteristic. Those characteristics are then added up for your specific property, creating the value. So you're not comparing one to another. You're extracting physical characteristics and valuing each characteristic. So it's done different. It's like almost a modified cost approach.
The next question is on the field card, where do we find the notation that a lot on the creek side is buildable or unbuildable?
If we have made an adjustment for that, it would be in the comment sections, typically on the landline or in the building notes. But to determine that, you'd really need to check with planning and zoning.
Okay, the planning and zoning department is located in Independence Hall too, and you obviously would have to call though first because we're do everything by appointment now. Where do we get a field card? Where can we get a field card?
I put the link
right
online there. You just click it and it'll bring you to the website.
So there's a link on the chat section that you can link to and get that information. What are the dates for the formal appeals?
Typically, we start taking applications after the grand list is signed, but the applications will be available at the end of the week. You need to know what your final assessment is, and those applications are due in the office by February 19th this year. Normally it's the 20th, but the 20th is a weekend, so it will be the 19th that Friday.
And the next question is, will the formal appeals be in person or by phone or Zoom? And I'm actually working with the tax assessor's office and the Board of Assessment Appeals and the school district to see if we can utilize one school in the evening so that one of the Board of Assessment Appeals, a person having their in-person one-on-ones, can be in a classroom alone, you know, so obviously for COVID safety, and then the meetings could be set up like that. But I just started those conversations today. But once everything is confirmed and set up, I will include it in my newsletter. The tax assessor will have it on his site, and we will be sending out information to the public so that they're well aware of that. I never received my letter until well after 10 days. I also was not aware that the informational process was extended. What are my options now? So I had said this earlier, they had so many informal hearings that they extended it 2 weeks to, you know, capture more people or give more people the opportunity. But because of the timeline, they weren't able to extend it any farther than that. But anyone, even if you don't get back anything or you weren't able to get into the informal hearing process, I've suggested to residents to sign up for the Board of Assessment appeal process, so that way you at least get to be heard and have that opportunity. And I did state this at the other town hall meeting on this, that no resident will be locked out of the Board of Assessment appeal process. So everyone will have that opportunity. The next one is, this period of time is extremely out of the norm.
I just
Sure.
want to clarify, the application will need to be in the office by February 19th to get an appointment. So anybody that's in by February 19th will get heard.
Right, anyone that can, goes through the application process.
Right. And
And
I'll
that's
just
why we
elaborate.
really need.
Yep. Once the informal appeals end this Friday and they finish updating all the changes, they will send out notices to everyone that had an informal hearing. So regardless of whether there's a change or not, you will get notified. And that will come out, Mike, I think the last week of January?
Oh, we should be sending them out the last week of January.
Right, and we are going to have that form up for people to do their application as soon as possible, which really needs to be done. I know the Board of Assessment Appeals is just finalizing it, excuse me. But I want that out as soon as possible, or posted, so residents can have that opportunity to begin that process. One says this period of time is extremely out of the norm, so this year needs to be looked at differently. I agree. When we approved the revaluation, obviously it was pre-COVID, and I think most elected leaders throughout the state were hoping that there was, that there could be some change, but we were already too far down that process. Governor Governor Lamont had a lot of opportunities to, put an executive order out. He did it about taxes and deferments and such. He put a lot of executive orders about all kinds of things, but unfortunately he didn't do one on changing the time period before this or delaying it. So really the only way to delay it, according to what I've been told through the legislature, is for the legislature or the governor to delay it, which would, we'd have to go through the whole process again and spend hire another revaluation and go through it, the whole process again, whatever they decided to delay. But no town has that, not that I'm aware of. I know towns have tried and weren't successful in doing that. Let's see. And the statute for pricing deadlines was revised. Assessments does not seem to consider the environment our town, our world is living through. Has Fairfield government considered relooking at the statutes that assessment process in the time of a global pandemic? I think I just talked about that and what that process is. That's a legislative process or a process under which the governor would make an executive order. Wouldn't a short-term spike in prices have a minimal effect on valuations over a 5-year period, statistically speaking? I'm not an assessor, so I don't know if anybody wants to try to answer that.
I'll say that we just don't know what's going to happen in the next year or 2 years or 3 years with values. There's no way to predict that.
The next question, state statute or public acts allow the town executive to request a delay, include unusual circumstances. Like I said earlier, Mike Fazio spoke a little bit about this at the last one, how Hamden had tried to do this. They didn't even go through the process of hiring their valuation. They were trying to get a delay from the state, and they didn't get it. So they were like behind in their revaluation. They had to hurry up, and as far as I know, no one has been granted that. It has to be the governor or the legislature saying that we could A, do that, or they would just do it uniformly across the state.
And to add to Hamden, they do not have an assessor in place and haven't had one for well over a year.
And towns get penalized if they're not done within the time period that the state sets. And unfortunately, the governor didn't make any allowances for the towns on that issue.
I believe you lose all your educational money.
At last week's meeting, it was mentioned that the revaluations were on a curve. Please define or explain further this curve This was in reference to comparing different lots with different per square foot assessment.
Right. We've seen a lot of people trying to make comparisons on a per square foot basis. And if you have a very small lot, you come out with an astronomical acreage per acre price. We don't do things on a per acre price because it doesn't produce an accurate result. So the land is on a curve, and what that means that as a lot increases in size, the value will go up, but it will not go up in proportion to the size of the lot. The example I use is if you had two lots side by side in a half-acre zone, and one lot was a half acre and the other lot was 0.99, the 0.99 lot, if it could not be subdivided, it would not be worth twice as much as the half-acre lot. And the half-acre lot would not be worth half as much as the 0.99. The 0.99 would be worth more, but not twice as much. And that's where the curve comes in.
Okay, there is a value for land and a value for improvements in the assessment. What are the most significant criteria for valuing the land portion?
Location.
Location and whether it can be built on, whether it's a building lot. The fact that a property can be built on is the biggest contributor to its value along with location.
So it's assessed on its location and the ability to have additional structures, you mean, built on the land, or?
No, whether you can build a house on it. I mean, if it has a house on it, it's assumed to be a building lot, whether it's conforming or pre-existing non-conforming. It does support a house. If you have a lot that can't support a house, you know, it's a 10-foot wide strip, then it's going to have a significantly lower value. It's considered excess at that point.
Where do we obtain an application for a formal hearing? I spoke about that earlier. The Board of Assessment Appeal is finalizing the form, and it's going to be out very soon. And when will we hear back from the informal hearing, or should we still complete the application if we have not heard back? And that came up at the last town hall we did on this, and yes, I told people if you did not either have the opportunity to get into an informal hearing process or did not get back anything from the revaluation company after your informal hearing process, to just file with the BAA. Because if you do get it back and there was a change, or you no longer want to go through the BAA process, you can always pull back. So I have been recommending to residents to just go and do that as soon as those forms are up. And I will make sure I widely distribute that in the newsletter and post it on social media as well. Have Fairfield officials requested legislative time to the changing the evaluation? You know, we spoke about this, and like I said, the governor could have done this in an executive order. We were way into the process, and I had checked, and a lot of other towns were trying to do that and didn't get anywhere. So it would really need to be a legislative fix, and frankly, it would need to be the governor, I think, personally, putting out an executive order. Just so we're clear, though, the town would have to go through this whole process if he did all of a sudden decide that, and it'd be late in the game for him to do that, because every single town in our state is doing this, or most are. And if he did do that, we would have to go back to the drawing board. I guess they would set new time periods for towns, and we'd have to go and hire again and pay the money for the reval and go through the whole process over again. Anyone try to speak to the governor again? No, I didn't try to speak to the governor. Again, I've heard from other chief elected officials who did try and were not successful, so it didn't seem as if I would have been either, if he wasn't granting it to any other people. I do not believe about whether there are ceilings on assessment changes to avoid extreme I'm sorry, just moved, extreme changes of 30%. If not, can Fairfield Fishers considering a ceiling given a precarious economic time? And Mike, you want to answer the first part? I don't know that I have the authority to do that.
There's no statutory authority to put a ceiling on the increases.
Exactly.
And if we did that, it would shift the burden to those people, to other people in the town.
The other thing, when you were speaking before about the BAA forms, with the informal forms, I believe if you don't get your informal form, that if you go back on the Vision website and look at your Fieldcard, the changes are uploaded, and Ross could correct me if I'm wrong, every week. So if you're into the first week of February, you could check if it's been changed on the website even before you get that informal meeting letter. Just you don't want to just send in forms if you're satisfied with the change, because you don't want them to get inundated with forms.
That's correct. We update the Vision website every Friday, so overnight. So every Saturday you should have fresh data.
So people can, if they didn't get their card or whatever, they could still go on the Vision appraisal site and see if it's been updated?
Yes. Every Friday they're updating the changes.
Isn't a particular neighborhood a better location, like the Fairfield Beach area, determined in the eyes of the beholder? I can understand beachfront as a distinction, but what else really matters? Some people want to be closer to town. Do you want to try to address that, Mike?
So it really goes based on what the market sees, not what an individual sees. If the market is, and when I mean market, that means the buyers and sellers are bidding properties higher, closer to the beach, or in different areas, the market drives the price. It's not in just one person, so it's the overall market and where people are putting their or wanting to live. It's well known throughout Fairfield that the beach area has been going up in value. It's no surprise to me or any of the realtors or any homeowners that I've spoken to on the phone that the beach area has increased. That's where people want to be, and that's what drives prices up.
Another location, land values. Could you expand on if and how sales, including new construction in a neighborhood, affect property assessments that were not sold?
Well, we use the sales to develop the pricing model, so the sales are what determine the values in a neighborhood. And we, if a house is new or a house sells that's brand new, we expect that to have a higher value than a house that's older and may not have been updated.
The link that you sent in the Fieldcard is no different than the one online data card. There are no comments section in the 3-page data online. Please send the link for the Fieldcard with comments.
Yeah, I mentioned that we would be putting the PDF version of the card online once the grand list is signed at the end of the month. Again, that PDF card is static. It does not change. So if we put it up now, it wouldn't contain the final values. So we're going to wait until the final values are set, and then the full card will be available online.
And when can residents expect to see that, Ross? Be able to access it?
I'm sorry?
When will they be able to access?
It'll probably take about a week for Vision to load that up there. There's 20,000 of them to produce, and there's a lot of towns that are doing this at the same time. So they have told me about a week. So we'll get that to them, the first week, first day of February, and it should be up the second week of February, right at the beginning of the week.
Okay. Another question about can more elected officials gather together and try to get this delayed. So there are people who's, so this is a tricky one, right? Other towns have tried and have not been successful. And there are residents in our town, probably quite a few, whose residential property tax, they may have been paying a higher rate for the last 5 years, and their property value went down, and now they're going to be paying more in line what they really have. And so that becomes a situation where we're saying that people who have been sort of overpaying, I'm sure they wouldn't be happy if their property values weren't modified as they were during this process. So there's a lot of other things to consider. There's a lot of residents in our town, and there's a lot of households that have varying different situations. Not everyone's assessments went up.
Exactly, Brenda, and that, like Greenfield Hill, their values were high for the last 5 years, and now that it's been reset, they're seeing a little decrease in valuation from 2015 to 2020. It would be unfair for them to not have this go through. So there's always another side of the equation, and that's the whole reason why they do revaluation. It's to equalize the grand list every 5 years.
An older house can be more updated than some new homes, and if there is no site visit, again, I think that would probably go back to the building permit.
Right, we do building permits day in and day out. We look at every permit that comes through the building department and inspect most of them. Any new construction, remodels, additions, we go out to the house or do a site visit to determine the changes. So we keep up with that. And then if we see something in the field that it doesn't have a permit, we will pick that up as well.
Someone said, if a beach home is only seasonable, should that be listed in the comments section? I would imagine, even if, I don't know what that means, seasonal.
Well, there are some houses that may not have heat, and that would be how the house is listed. The comment sections aren't going to be detailed comments about the house. They're really notes for us in there, and they might, a lot of our notes pertain to if we were out on a permit and we're issuing a certificate of correction, which is how we add the new value, there might be a note of when we did it and permit number, whatever, is complete. So that's the nature of the notes in most cases. There are notes if there's a particular condition issue on the house that's unusual. If there's an economic or functional adjustment, that may be in the notes section as well. But they're not as detailed as you might expect them to be.
One person's asking about appliances generating a spike in assessment. Mike, would it just be if someone had a kitchen remodel that you would assess it just based on that, not on the appliances?
So if a kitchen has been totally remodeled, that would be reflected in the depreciation. There would be less depreciation on the house. There's a code that we put in there for remodeling kitchens. It lessens the depreciation of the home, which gives a little bit more value. And as we all know, the remodeled kitchens, remodeled bathrooms do add value to homes.
But not appliances, though, Mike. I mean, if
no,
you just went out and bought a new refrigerator, would that?
No, we don't. We don't value refrigerators if they buy a new refrigerator.
Okay. So someone asked if we could put the Fieldcard, updated Fieldcard link in the newsletter. Absolutely. As soon as that information, again, Ross, just to remind everyone, that's after the grand list is signed?
Correct. And it will be on the normal VGSI site that Mike provided a link for, and same link that's on the website. It will be in that same location.
Right, and we have been including a lot of the reval information, among other things, in the newsletter. And then if you scroll down to the tax assessor, his website is there, so people can check. But I will, I'll make a note to make sure that we do that when those are ready, so that people can have that opportunity. So we've come, it seems like, to the end of the chat questions. So we don't have that many people, so I'd like to at least open it up for residents who would like to try to ask a question directly that may have not been addressed during the chats, just generally how the process works, or if there's some question that wasn't asked that you wanted to know.
Brenda, also, if I could make a suggestion here, if people still have hearings that they haven't had and they're calling our office, or we'll be calling you for the hearing and you're expecting our call, the most successful way to get a result is to be prepared with sales. Look in your neighborhood, and there's a lot of online information today that you could get with recent sales in your neighborhood, and compare it to your house. Is it the same size? Is it the same condition? Do they have the same amount of bathrooms? Is the lot similar? And supply those sales to the person taking your information. They will get to my desk and I'll look at it. The ones that get no results are the people who just say, well, the value is up 30% or 20%, and I just don't want to pay more taxes. They give no information for us to take a look at. It's not beneficial, and the result is most likely no change unless I see that there's a problem on the Fieldcard. So even when you go to the BAA, the same thing's going to hold true. They're going to also want to look at sales, or provide information that needs to be corrected on the card. We spoke before about kitchens being remodeled or not being remodeled. If you have information that your kitchen's been redone, make sure it's on the card. You want that information. Or if you added a bathroom, if there's a bathroom that's missing, you want to make sure all that information is up to date on your Fieldcard.
And I'll add that,
So
when you're appealing, you really want to focus on the final value. That's what really matters. I know everyone wants the formula or how the algorithm, but it's not as simple as just giving you an equation. It's more complex. There's a lot of different variables that are taken into account that interact with each other. So what's really important is the final value that we've come up with, and is that accurate or not? And the best way to determine that accuracy, like Mike said, is with similar sold properties. And if you need to expand the time frame beyond the 1 year period, you can do that in an appeal. You can look,
we're not going to get that. We're not going to get that.
I'm sorry, and you can look after October 1st of 20 if you need to. I'm sorry, let me finish, and then we can have your question. So I was saying you can expand your time period to before 10/1/19 and after. But if there are good sales closer to October 1st of 20, those should be used first, because those are the most valuable.
Okay, but we're not going to get that final assessment until the end of January, correct?
Right. You have the number we gave you is the number, unless you've had an informal or there's some other reason that we change it. So anybody that hasn't changed.
What the informal was supposed to do, because my informal, quite honestly, was only to verify that the Fieldcard, which I didn't know I had or could get, but to verify that the Fieldcard was accurate. So if that was the purpose of the informal hearing, then we're finding out now how this thing was done and more information. So if I get a final adjustment or a final Fieldcard at the end of January, then the only avenue to appeal is after the February 19th, correct?
Well, if you had an informal meeting and you want to supply sales information that you want to be considered, email the sales information with the date that you had your informal meeting, and that will make it to the file. The system is just closed for people who've never made an appointment. But if you want to send information in after your appointment, we welcome that information and we will attach it to the file. So if you had an informal meeting already and you want to send something additional, just make sure you put the address, your PID number, the date you had that informal meeting. They will go to the file, add this information, and then when it crosses my desk, I'll have it.
But it's more than just sale information.
Well, sales is the best thing when you're looking at value. If you're looking at fixing errors on your physical characteristics of your home, that's something different. You could, if there's an error, you could send a picture, or you could outline
It's
what the
possible
error
for a
is.
house to have. It's possible for a house to have 2 times the square footage of another one, right, and not have sold, right? So there wouldn't be any updated sale information, and that house could be assessed at way lower than anything that perhaps sold more recently. So that's not necessarily sale information. That's just old information. And if it's double the square footage, and no one's going inside the house, and they're both Creekside or they're both Beachside, then how is that assessment being made? It's just, I know that you guys talk about mass appeal and the statistics and everything else that we're sort of throwing around, but it's a lot, quite honestly, to throw at people. We got the letter at the end of December, and we were told that we had to schedule this before even I got the letter. So I mean, there's a lot of things being thrown around. There's a lot of unusual circumstances. I have homes that are on the beach that are valued at less than someone on the creek for half the square footage. I mean, so doesn't this mass statistic that you do, does it throw out outliers? In other words, if something's double the square footage and something's really assessed much higher than sort of a comparable, does the system generate abnormal results, and so that you can look at them individually?
What are the addresses you're referring
anomalies? What's that?
to? What are the addresses you're referring to?
I'll have to write it down. My home is at 2030 Fairfield Beach Road. The home across the street from me is at 2041 on the beach. I mean, I didn't know that that's what we were supposed to do. I mean, are we supposed to argue that my neighbor is paying less than I'm supposed to pay? I mean, this just seems so incredibly unfair. And I see on the list there's a home at 1094 on the Creekside that's assessed at less than mine. And it's double the square footage. It's 4 bedrooms, I think 6 bathrooms. I have 1,900 square feet, and this is like 3,000 square feet.
And what's that house?
These are the kinds of, what?
Which house is that?
1094. And 2041 is right on the beach, across the street from me, and that's assessed at less than me. It just, these things, once I see that there's a couple of things that are outliers, then I start to question the whole thing. It's a very complicated process. I give you guys a lot of credit for having to do it, but if you've been doing it for decades, I would assume that at some point it gets a little more streamlined. But it doesn't seem that way. It seems like there's so much that's arbitrary in this process. And at the end of the day, I don't know what the mill rate's going to be, but it could be another X $1,000s more. And the homes that aren't on the beach aren't paying flood insurance, and our flood insurance is astronomically high, even though my house is 16.5 feet off the ground and built to FEMA standards.
So I'm going to jump in now, and because we wanted to talk a little bit more about the general questions,
I would recommend to do this.
Right, I would recommend that you give the tax assessor's office a call tomorrow and talk a little bit more about your specific home. And I think that sending, as Mr. Fazio recommended, additional information if you already had the informal process. And I think I did want to have a kind of jump in before this conversation started. Mike, when you were telling residents to find comps around their homes or so on and so forth, how does someone do that, for example? Like, do you look up real estate, or do you go to vision appraisals? Like you were saying, well, if your neighbor or this, I mean, how does someone know that? Do they look up their neighbors, or if they knew a household? I don't know how the average everyday citizen
So,
can come in prepared if they're not like a real estate agent, or they don't really know how to get that information.
so you could look at the sales that are provided within Vision Appraisal. There's a little module in there that will create the sales. Also, there is a PDF that we could send out if someone requests. The assessors also has it that has all the sales that were used in the model. The other places is Realtor.com. There's sales. Zillow has all the sales. There's a lot of places on the internet to find sales.
Listening?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have said email Ross Murray at rmurray@fairfieldct.org. And I see Jan C. had a question earlier. I apologize. Jan, are you still on the line?
Hi, I'm here for that question. So
Sure, go right ahead.
I'm familiar with the process. We have a fairly tight time frame from we get the results of the informal hearings before the Board of Assessment Appeals filing needs to happen. And there's a cost for having an appraisal done by an appraiser. So to go before the Board of Assessment Appeals, do we need to have and pay for a licensed appraiser to perform a sales comparable type of appraisal? Or can we perform that as residents as long as it's organized, credible, includes the right normal type of adjustments to present that to the Board of Assessment Appeals?
You definitely, that's the best route to do it yourself if you have the knowledge on how to do it. There's no reason to pay an appraiser. Just get the sales, compare it to your house, make adjustments, and provide that information. There's no reason that you need to hire an appraiser to do it. Sometimes people do hire appraisers because they're uncomfortable doing it, or they had an appraisal done for financing recently and they just send that out as a document. But I would definitely suggest.
The biggest typical adjustments that most of us would see would be an adjustment for square footage. And I tried to ask this question earlier, and we didn't get to the level of detail or the specificity I thought is needed. If you have comps and you want to try and compare, and you're trying to adjust for square footage and not adjust for bedrooms because you said you adjusted to the square footage, what is the dollar per square foot that you would typically expect to see? I've seen $50 per square foot in appraisals, and I've seen $75 a square foot, sometimes $100 a square foot, typically not more than that. So what number would you say, in your wide experience and many appraisals and experience with the model, what is the amount per square foot that we should try and adjust for in preparing that thoughtful appraisal that you just suggested we should do?
I don't think that you need to get that detailed when you're trying to make adjustments on per characteristic. The way I would do it is I would put the three comps with yours. I would list the square footage of them all. I would do a price per square foot, sales price per square foot, and then I would just make pluses and minuses. For example, if you have two bathrooms, and they have 3 bathrooms, you could make a minus in that category, because in the end, the sales, you're just going to plus and minus, and then you're going to look at the range of value per square foot, and then that fits in times your square footage. That's a good way to look at it. To make adjustments, if I said 75, then everyone's going to sit down writing 75, and it might not be applicable to every house that we're speaking to right now. So to do it that way would be very misleading to everyone. The best way to do is to put the 3 sales.
We've all seen, because of refinancing that we've had, every appraiser will adjust for various characteristics as you described, but when they adjust the gross living area. They would typically use some dollar amount to adjust the gross living area number, and that is frequently the biggest driver when you have comparable size parcels and comparable style and size houses. The gross living area adjustment is the most typical one, and that can really wildly vary the amount of adjustment. So it'd be very helpful to know that in your experience, it's, you know, what you typically see or what you've used for your other types of financing appraisals you have done. What would be the dollar per square foot for gross living area adjustment that you would utilize?
It depends on the value of the house that you're speaking of. If the range is a $300,000 to $400,000 house, it's much different than if you're at $1.5 million, or if you're at a 2.5, or if you're at a $10 million house. So for me to give a general statement on this call, it depends on who I'm speaking to and what their house category is. So that's why I'm saying, if you have homes that are very similar in the same neighborhood as yours, per square foot, they should be very tight on a value range. So if you're at $300 a square foot per sales price, your range should be very close, and then you could just do pluses and minuses. I'm looking at it. That's the way I'm gonna look at it when I'm reviewing it. And then the Board of Assessment Appeals is going to look at it the same way. I'm not going to do an individual appraisal report every time when I'm reviewing this. I'm going to say, okay, he gave me 3 comps. These 3 comps sold for this per square foot. This one's a little better. This one looks a little better. This one has a garage. That one doesn't have a garage. And I kind of see if the value makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, I make adjustments within the model to adjust the value either up or down. So it's 2 very different things, doing appraisals on mass and appraisals for financing that you're typically seeing on a form. So it's hard to give you a per square foot. If you're in a house that's a brand new house, the range is different than if you're in an older house. So it's 2 different animals here.
Okay.
Okay, so Mike, just to be clear for everyone, do you recommend it, for example, if your assessment went up a huge amount, would you recommend people get pay for a private review of their home to bring with them, or?
Well, if they're uncomfortable doing it themselves, I would suggest that they maybe call an appraiser or a realtor and get some idea. A lot of times there's the realtors will help you out for nothing. Appraisers, you might be able to have a conversation. I know in our appraisal practice here, if somebody calls me to do a tax appeal and I look at it to see if they have a case or not, if they don't even have a case, I just tell them straight out, listen, I can't help you. The town's number is very close. We do thousands of tax appeals throughout the state of Connecticut for other municipalities. That's how we handle that type of work here. So a lot of appraisers will take a look at you, and there's a list of good appraisers out there that live and work in the Fairfield area.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that when you're doing an appeal, you should really keep it fairly simple. You don't want to overwhelm the BAA member with too much information. They are not appraisers. They're elected and with 4 additional appointed people for this year. So again, you keep it fairly simple. Don't come in with 20 pages of analysis. It's going to overwhelm them. 3 or 4 good comps is really the best.
So just to clarify for our residents, either A, get an appraisal done on your property. Is there a sort of a how-to, Mike, for people if they don't want to go and pay that? How to do that, how to get comps and that of that nature? Is there something?
Like I said, I would go on the internet, realtor.com. Zillow has all the sales information. Zillow is great. Their estimator is not great because the way that works is it just takes the assessor's number so it'll be the old assessment and it adds to it. So their Zillow estimator is not correct, but it does have all the sales in it in your neighborhood. And you could scroll over them and see each one and then click on it, and you could print out right from there all the sales, the type of house it is, and send it in. We consider all the homes that you send in, as long as it's in the immediate neighborhood. You know, you're not going to compare Southport to Stratfield, but you would compare Stratfield to Stratfield or Tunxas Hill to Tunxas Hill.
Okay,
I would
that's
suggest
helpful.
that's your best way, and it won't cost anything to do that. And I would say 70% of the hearings that we have, people do supply information from the internet for sales. We get very, very few. I think in Fairfield, we probably had less than a dozen appraisals that were performed just for this purpose. So people aren't going out and buying an appraisal for this purpose. We get a lot of appraisals that were done for purchase or refi. A lot of people refied in the last few years to take advantage of the new low interest rates. Send those appraisals in. Even if it's a 2018, I could adjust for the difference in the real estate market and take a look at make sure everything's correct.
So I'd like to follow up.
That's very, Jan, if you could just wait, I want to just do a couple more, and we are getting close to an hour and a half, so we're going to be shutting down in 10 minutes. One person asked, is it true that certain appraisals went down in value from 2015 to 2020? And as Mike said, during some of the formal hearings he did with us presentations, for example, Sasko Hill went down in its appraisal. Now, I think most of us who live in town know that I think at any given time, there were about 15 houses for sale on Sasko Hill, and none of them were being sold. And I know that their taxes were quite high. And I think all of those values went down to reflect their true costs. And similarly to Greenfield Hill, people had there was a lot of houses for sale in Greenfield Hill. I had a lot of friends whose houses were on the market a very long time, and many who took way, way less, but we're paying a higher tax rate on that house for the last 5 years. So there was people who were changed in this valuation.
I'll just add a little bit to that. When we say that an area went down, it doesn't mean that every house went down in that neighborhood or they all went down the same. There's always going to be a range of decreases, and there's very often going to be houses that increased even though the neighborhood went down.
And so I just want to address, someone wrote that they wanted Mr. Fazio's property to be reviewed because it went down in assessment. And I mean, obviously I don't think that's an appropriate thing to write. But again, I just want Mr. Murray to address that, because I am aware that Mr. Murray went and did his own assessment of Mr. Fazio's property, and I just want to make sure that people understand that. And Ross, if you would like to elaborate on that, I think it would be helpful.
In my office, we have 3 people that do the field work in the town, and the deputy assessor does the beach area. So the deputy assessor did go out and do a full inspection of the home. There were some minor mistakes. I think the deck he added a patio, but there was a small deck that had been removed, so that came off. You know, I guess that's public information. Mike purchased the house in 2019 for $1,300,000, and it was assessed for, I think, about $1.7 at the time. So yes, his house did come down, but it is under renovation. He has redone the master bath and one upstairs bath, but the rest of the house is in need of renovation. There's holes in the floor for inspection purposes in the first floor. The kitchen is probably from the 1970s, and the dining room is quite a bit out of level. So there needs to be quite a bit more work done to the house, and when that work is completed, the value will come up to reflect that, just like we do with any other property under construction or renovation.
Thank you, Ross. And I think we have about 7 minutes left. So, Jan, did you want to ask another question?
Yeah, the follow-up I would have it to some of the discussion is to go in front of the Board of Assessment Appeals. We don't need an actual licensed appraiser's appraisal, whether it was done for a financing. We can do one ourselves, and if it's structured and thoughtful and organized, that would be accepted, because I've seen other Board of Assessment Appeal hearings where if you didn't have an appraisal done by an appraiser, you got no traction. Nothing was adjusted. Nothing was really analyzed.
There's absolutely no requirement to have an appraisal to go to the board. You know, as I've said, you can take some, as Mike said, you could get get your comps. You don't have to make detailed adjustments, but, you know, they should steer you to a range of value for your home.
Okay, thank you.
And again, please keep it fairly simple and don't overwhelm them.
So we have just a couple minutes. Is there any question that wasn't already answered or something anyone would like to ask? Okay, we're going to put some additional information. We have been putting information in newsletters. If you want to go back on the town's website, and my newsletters are all cataloged from every week. So we've been doing it since, I believe, September, including information in the newsletter. And you can always go to the tax assessor's website as well. But I would encourage people, we're going to get that form up ASAP. Hopefully, Ross, when are we looking at? I thought it was going to be finalized this week. Is that accurate?
That's what we're striving for.
Because the plan is to have that form. They wanted to make it a little simpler for residents. So we're going to make sure that form is available so people can get on and schedule their appointments before the deadline of the 19th. So that should give a fair amount of time. And we will include that in the newsletter, and we'll also be boosting it out on social media as well. Is there anything, Ross or Mike, that you think would be helpful for residents to know before we shut down?
Hey, one more question regarding the Board of Assessment Appeals. What historically had been done was the resident presented to one individual who then presented to the board, to the full board, and the decision was made. And frequently, information was lost in that translation. I'm curious if this year we could present as residents directly to the board, who would then ultimately make the decision, to avoid that loss of understanding and communication, to allow the resident to really be their own advocate in front of the board to describe their specific situation.
I don't think that's how the board's going to do it.
I'm not sure if that would be even possible because of the amount. The reason we added additional members was try to allow people to get through the process. There's going to be a tremendous, I think there's probably a good amount of people who are going to want them, and it would take an extraordinarily long time for them to listen to each one individually. I mean, as a group. So it would take much longer than if each person is listening and they can get through the process more quickly. Well, at least in a fair time frame, because there's so many. I mean, I don't even know if it's possible to do it.
And I'll add that the board,
what happened
the board
spends
a tremendous amount of time as it is, and spends weeks doing it when we have just 100 appeals. So they do really commit a lot of their personal time to that board, and do take thoughtful consideration on all appeals.
No, I know they do, but what happens is the resident presents to one board member in a 15-minute slot, and then that board member goes into the full board and presents in that 15-minute slot. If you just have the resident time-bound, and they present for their 15 minutes, and you ring the bell, they have to be done, then you're only doing it once rather than doing it twice, and you're doing it in the most effective manner possible.
I just don't think the board will have sufficient time to do that for all the appeals.
And we also have the COVID.
You'd have to have a quorum then. You'd have to have a quorum together every time. And, you know, to accommodate people's schedules, where they meet during the day and in the evenings, it's not, I just don't see that would be possible.
And we also have the COVID, that is kind of problematic, but any information you bring to the appeal is, I believe, shared with the whole board for them to make the decision. And then again, and this is new for me too, but I'm told that as soon as that process is over, and if people are denied, they still have the process to go file in court, Ross. Is that accurate?
Right. Yes. Once the BAA is completed, if you're still not satisfied, your next avenue would be to Superior Court. And that is, you have 60 days from the date of decision.
Okay. So we'll be sending that information out and exactly how the process is going to work. We're still finalizing where they're going to be doing these meetings. So obviously we have a lot of safety issues with COVID. You know, we thought we would do them virtually, but BAA members felt it was, they wanted to have the opportunity, give people that opportunity to meet one-on-one, face-to-face. So we're working on that. And again, I will send that out in the newsletter once Ross sends that information to me and I have all of it, and we can send the forms and everything else that we talked about. All right, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. I hope this was somewhat helpful and informative to people. And again, if you have any specific questions, you can email Ross Murray at rmurray@fairfieldct.org about process or about your specific, have a specific question about what's going on if you didn't get your question answered this evening. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.